Hello, and apologies if you do hear some coughing in this video. I will try and keep it to a minimum. I'll also try and keep any nose blowing to a minimum, and try and get them out and edit them out if they do actually occur, or at least put my hand across. That's, as you can guess, the reason these are recorded videos, not lives. I've kept having a scenario where I've been feeling better in the middle of the day, thought I can do a live, and then gone, by the evening, this is not going to be practical. It's getting worse, and there's no way I'll be able to do a live by 7 o'clock. So what I've decided to do instead was at 5 o'clock going, it's going the same way, I'm going to record now. And hopefully I'm going to record video for today, and a video for tomorrow. And then tomorrow, I'm going to record a video for Monday. And hopefully a video also for Wednesday. And hopefully I'll be able to do the lives Sunday and Monday. Or Sunday and Tuesday. Hopefully I'll be better. I do apologise. It was worked out afterwards by my sister that I was awake for 102 hours straight, which was not sensible even for a functioning insomniac. I usually do have at least a couple of hours sleep, 2 to 3 hours sleep a night. And then normally when I've done an effort like that, I would do a long sleep. I hope my body will allow me to, but for some reason when Mum came home, I got basically 2 to 3 hours sleep both nights, and my body basically crashed on me. It happens as you get older. I am, I used to do this quite regularly when I was a few years ago, even when I was prepping stuff before going away to go see the girlfriend I had at the time, who was up the other end of the country, so I would have to, do all the recordings, get everything done, and then drive all the way up there during COVID to see her. And yeah, but I haven't done that in a couple of years, and my body's basically going, Plus, I have to admit, I was up mostly doing manual labour and rebuilding the entire first floor of the property, of the house, to an extent. I think there's not a single room upstairs in our house where I haven't replaced at least a portion of a floorboard, if not a whole floorboard. Anyway, that's all by means of apology, and I do apologise. So, I'm sorry for the start of this video being quite so full of an apology, but it needed to be because I've had to move to lives again. Anyway, T-Class. T-Class submarines. Now, why am I starting off one of them? Why have I brought them into this? Well, because if I'm going to do something quickly, and hopefully get it right, and hopefully get it right first time, I want to do something I'm fairly familiar with, and I'm fairly worked up on. And as many of you know, I'm currently in the process of putting together a book on the Flower-class corvettes, and on U-class submarines, which means I've done quite a lot of work on the T and the S-class as well. Now, one of the things people often hear me talk about, and discuss quite often, is that the Royal Navy did not produce area-specific ships. They didn't. They didn't think of ships as being a Pacific ship or an Atlantic ship. They couldn't afford to. The Royal Navy couldn't afford to because it had so many threats to deal with, it had to defend an entire empire. And the trouble is for the Royal Navy, if you think of a ship like that as being for the Pacific, you can guarantee when you have a problem in the Pacific, it won't be available. You need to produce ships which you can use for all of them. It might be orientated around a role which makes them more suitable for the operations they're likely to conduct in the Pacific, but it's still designed to be able to do those operations in the Mediterranean, in the Indian Ocean, in the Atlantic, in the North Sea, wherever the Royal Navy requires it to do them. Hence the whole strike, fleet, and cruiser carrier, and forward aviation support ship. The Royal Navy had these sort of things for their aircraft carriers. They also had something similar with their submarines. The T-class are the ambush predators. Now, what is their mission? Well, their mission is quite simple. In any space, and when they're originally designed, in any space, if you get them there, they'll be able to launch such a large spread of torpedoes, they will guarantee hitting a target. Think about that. Mathematical certainty of engaging a target. It's beautiful. I mean, it's something which the Royal Navy's been focused on since, well, the Battle of Jutland. Before the Battle of Jutland. That's the whole reason for Jellicoe turning around. A mathematical certainty that if enough torpedoes are launched them, something will hit. And he will lose ships, he will lose dreadnoughts, and he could lose the war. So it's better and safer to turn around than it is to carry on fighting. It's better to maneuver and then re-engage. This is the T-class. However, think about it from the perspective of an ambush predator, what scenarios that can be used for. In the Far East, it has a very specific job, i.e. anything trying to rush towards Singapore can get delayed by ambush predators sitting in the various channels, approaching the South China Sea. They can sit there and you rush your fleet through, they wait till they see a suitable target, something major, capital ship, carrier, and they launch their spread of torpedoes at it. Or alternatively, because of the way the British are trained to target their submarines, they wait till they see the auxiliaries with fuel going through and then they launch their spread of torpedoes at them. The British are nasty sometimes, okay? In fact, they're always nasty in war. There is, they don't set out to do, how do I put this, evil things. But in war, they certainly do think, what is the maximum way for us to cause the maximum damage? Take out a carrier, that's gold. Capital ship in the 1930s, that's platinum. But take out the entire supply ships of a fleet, then be diamond. Now, T-class are the ambush submarines, and as I work through the videos on this series, I'm going to work through what the other types of submarine the Royal Navy had on. Because they also had mine-laying submarines, which were the original type of the ambush submarine. But then it was a case of how quickly are these subs going to get to position? Are they going to be able to lay their mines in time? Mines are good, but torpedoes will do. T-class will get there more quickly. And they do look at fitting the T-class with mine-laying gear. As it is, only one of them is actually fitted with it. But, they work things through. They work things through. But working things through often involve different approaches for different scenarios. And one of the things the Royal Navy has as a sort of mission approach to their warship design, and how they fit into the overall whole, where usually they have an emphasized capability but are still generally capable. It makes their designs very adaptable. Again, it's something which we could be argued to be reading back into them, and reading back into their designs. But the other reason I'm starting off with the T-class submarines, I'm starting off with the British submarines, apart from, the work I've been doing on the U-class book, is that I've been lucky enough to read enough archival resources over the years on the designs and concepts the Royal Navy was working for on their submarines, that I'm fairly certain of what I'm talking about when I'm talking through these things. And that if you're going to be establishing a format, and I was going to wait off on submarines until I was slightly diving into submarines properly till I was slightly further into the key ship series, but it seems appropriate now. If you're going to be establishing a format, you want to establish the format with something you know about. You're fairly confident in knowledge, so you can experiment more. Still love this book. To be honest, I will admit, while I've been sick over the last couple of days, I've been reading through the new second edition, and I love it. The pictures really do pop in the second edition. And, yeah. Pen has sort of done me proud again. They really have. And I hope many people buy it. Two reasons. One, the historian, evangelist, sort of spreading the love of naval history part of me, and the reason I do the channel, of course, is I'd really like to share my love of naval history. I know it's not, as I've said before many times, I know it's not a communicable disease, but I'm doing my level to best to make it one. And the part of me which is knows when exactly my tax bill is due in January would really like a check from my publishers in January. So, would like a lot of books sold. Ah, joys of being an increasingly independent academic. Independent in that my financial support and ability to do my work entirely comes from the support of the money gained through people watching the YouTube videos and the money people do through Patreon and Ko-fi and all those things. Without it, it wouldn't be possible. Seriously, would not be possible. Even Twitch, honestly, that came in quite useful because while I was ill, of course, I didn't write an article, and the money turned up from Twitch, and it was the same as I normally make for an article, and I went, okay, yeah, that's about a couple of months' earnings, but that'll do. Paid for the groceries. Got me some Lemsip. That was more of a laugh than a cough. Got me some Lemsip, which is what I needed, and some Iron Brew. So, the T-Class. 62 were ordered across 5 programs of construction, and 53 were delivered. Triton is the first, and she's laid down on 28th August 1936, launched 5th October 1937, and commissioned the 9th of November 1938. There are many more which come after her, but this is a good class. Now, one of the normal things is that people tend to go, well, the Royal Navy can't have been as keen on submarines is because they don't produce as many as the Germans. And the reason for that is the Royal Navy is not focused solely on submarines. The Germans are using submarines by the end of the war as they are not only their primary, but their only real oceanic attack asset. It's their only real method of reaching out and attacking the world's oceans by the end of the war. At no point is the Royal Navy like that. At no point is the Royal Navy in a scenario where they only have one system. So the thing is, when you compare this and the priority in the number of submarines built, and this is where I have the problems with historians who do make the claim that because there's so much less produced by the Royal Navy than the Germans, therefore the Royal Navy didn't like submarines. As I point out that the Royal Navy is also at the same time building aircraft carriers, capital ships, cruisers, destroyers, corvettes, frigates, sloops, and a whole suite of other things as well, and landing craft, at the same time as they're building submarines. I'm not going to say it's a groundless or baseless claim to say that the Royal Navy disdained submarines because they didn't produce as many as the Germans did. I'd say it's a non sequitur. Trying to pronounce it with a slightly blocked nose is really interesting. Non sequitur fallacy. Basically, the conclusion doesn't follow the premise. It's a case of your premise is because of numbers of construction, but they have different contexts and different scenarios. So therefore, this is not an apples and apples comparison. This is not even an apples and orange comparison. This is not a compare between fruit. This is between fruit and vegetables. This is comparing oranges and carrots because they're the same colour. Whereas a farmer who's growing oranges will have a very different crop and crop ratio and stuff than someone who's growing carrots. They might both be orange, but it's very different. Because they're serving different markets and they're using often different soil types and different sized farms. So, yeah. It's people being people. But as you can see, they're quite a nice design. They're quite a swept-back design in many ways. And one of the other interesting things about the Royal Navy at this time is they're doing a lot of study into submarines manoeuvring underwater. Okay? Again, Advantage the Royal Navy has with having bases around the world, the intention of moving bases around the world. That's why they have MONABs, the Mobile Naval Bases scenario. Is that the Royal Navy doesn't really think as much about surface transiting. They realise their submarines are going to have to do it. But it's not the primary deciding factor in the shaping of their submarines. It's as equally as important as their subsurface manoeuvring. And you can really see this when you look at the U-class. The U-class are really exceptionally like that. But it also comes through in the S and the T-class. Okay, it's part of them. It's baked into the submarine design process of the Royal Navy. They're big subs, though. They are. Their size, their shaping, everything about them is around having that salvo of 10 21-inch torpedoes. Now again, it's often focused in on the Japanese scenario, but you have to remember that the Royal Navy, for much of the 1920s and 30s, the biggest threat, the most likely naval threat, and the one they were going to have to deal with solo with little to no Army or Air Force support, that was by those own services and missions, was going to be the Japanese. So it's often sensible that things are structured in terms of their capabilities in a Far Eastern War scenario. Hello, gorgeous. Sorry, fluffy researchers didn't need to take that attention. But if you think about it, the ambush scenario works just as well in the Straits approaching Singapore as it does in the Straits of Gibraltar, as it does in the various spaces and narrows of water around Denmark, and outside of various harbours and key ports. The ability to fire a spread, as it's often called, rather than a salvo, a spread, of 10 21-inch torpedoes forward, and then reload, and fire 6 more from another position, should you wish to take it up. That's useful. That is incredibly useful. It's not a guaranteed hit. And again, some of the discussions you find this, especially in some of the papers, talk about getting through Japanese destroyer screens. And again, you are reminded by that of the Japanese anti-submarine warfare capabilities in World War I. How capable and skilled and useful they were for the Royal Navy in the Mediterranean. And therefore the Royal Navy was always of the suspicion that Japanese anti-submarine warfare capabilities would be of the highest order. They honestly believed them to be the equal, possibly even a superior of them, as they felt the Japanese would be investing in technologies. And again, the Royal Navy, there are sections of it which are incredibly arrogant, but the intelligence and constructors and a lot of the plans officers have a firm belief that on occasion your enemy might get lucky. And therefore you have to prepare for the fact that they might get lucky and might develop something which you haven't developed. Or they might pursue an avenue of research which you think looks terrible, but which for them works. And then you're in trouble, and you have to deal with it. Can't think where they picked that lesson up in history, but it's part of it. And for its case, the T-class are littered with the Royal Navy lessons from history. You could even look at their sort of twin diesel engines, their twin electric motors, 2 shafts. Everything is duplicated for reliability. They don't want to rely on any single one thing. They've got to have backups of everything. Again, they're not trying steam. They're also not trying too fast. They're not trying for too fast. They're going, right, how fast do we want these vessels to go? Well, 15.5 knots on the surface is fine. It's not going to keep up the fleet. That's not their problem. That's not their plan. Their submarines are not about cooperating with the fleet at this point. Their submarines are about going out on their own missions and doing their duty. 9 knots submerged? That's pretty darn good. That is very good. If we consider really the closest equivalent of the T-class submarine in the Royal Navy, in the Kriegsmarine, we'd be talking about the Type 9 submarine. Yeah. Type 9 is a pretty cool sub, but if we consider both of them, whether it's the Type 9A, Type 9B, or actually, and the Type 9C, all of them have a top speed under submerged of 7.3 knots. But they can do faster on the surface. They do 18 knots on the surface. Now that reflects a difference in design. That reflects a difference in focus. They also tend to have a slightly longer range. They can do 10,500 nautical miles at 10 knots on the surface. T-class, 8,000 nautical miles. But again, there is a difference going on here. And the difference really comes down to when you start looking at their armament, because the German submarines have 6 torpedo tubes, 4 in the bow, 2 in the stern. And yeah, they can launch 21-inch or 24-inch in the Type 9D, but that's a far smaller salvo. You start to realise that the German submarine is designed around being a sort of long-range commerce raider, predator. It's got a 105mm gun. It's got all sorts of things. It's very capable for long-range operations. But it's not the same design as this is. Both have their values and capabilities. And the point I'm using the Type 9 here for is not to say the T-class is better than Type 9. Because actually, in terms of fit for their navies, I would argue the Type 9's a better fit for the Kriegsmarine and what they wanted to do than Type 7 was. And I'd argue the T is a perfect fit for what the Royal Navy wanted it to do. It's also quite adaptable to what they needed to do, but you could argue the U-class was probably the best fit of all their wartime submarines to what the Royal Navy used them for. But leaving that to one side, the Royal Navy is prepared to accept a shorter range for a lot more torpedoes, especially in the initial salvo, because the Royal Navy has the basing abilities it does, and the Royal Navy submarines are equivalent. Now, if we can go for an American submarine, we can go for Japanese submarines. The thing about submarine technology in this period is there's a lot of myths which go around about one nation having a supreme technology and others having terrible technology. Honestly, they all have strengths and weaknesses. And arguably, if you were looking for some of the best tech as it proves in terms of utility during World War II, you'd probably be wrong if you went for any of the major powers. You should go for the Dutch. Because the Dutch are developing some really cool submarine capabilities. Mainly because they were looking to them to provide their real security for their Far Eastern Empire. But traditionally, the argument is, was it American? Was it German? Was it Japanese? Was it Italian? Was it Russian? Was it British? And honestly, barring the Russians, who have an interesting relationship with quality control, and the Italians, who produce these gorgeous, massive submarines, which, let's be honest, the T-class is also a gorgeous, massive submarine. And honestly, the worst thing you can actually be using in the Mediterranean, to my mind, is a gorgeous, massive submarine. All do a pretty good job. There are none I can think of which are an absolute terrible fit for what their nations require for them. The main issues you have are either quality control, logistics, or infrastructure. In the German case, it's the fact that they have some supremely well-designed and technologically developed submarines, but the crew quality declines as the war goes on. Because of the training, because of the losses, because of needing that pool of veterans spread ever further and further to provide the kernels of these critical crews, it's a constant trouble for them. The Royal Navy's issue is always justifying the submarines as part of the wider program. Because they are useful, they are very useful in the missions they want them to do, but you have to justify them versus if there's a submarine do this as well as a destroyer group might. And that's the interesting thing when you've got the real debate in Malta as to which is the more powerful striking unit is whether it's Force K or 10 Flotilla. And I would argue 10 Flotilla is probably the more cumulative, more effective striking unit. But Force K is certainly the more disruptive striking unit. And that's a more difficult thing to analyse. Now I would say about the external tubes that they proved interesting. They really did improve interesting. They have to be... well, how do I put this? The bow caps have to be worked manually, which required a lot of effort. And they're also vulnerable to damage. But that's the thing. If you really think about it, the Royal Navy was calculating to an extent on that spread of torpedoes fired by a submarine. Potentially being their only spread. Potentially. The idea being they might get to fire one shot, one spread, one salvo, and then would be prosecuted so fiercely by enemy destroyers they would either be sunk or forced to withdraw, beyond which they could not engage again. Because to have any hope of catching the enemy, they'd have to surface. And let's be honest, with a top speed of 15 knots on the surface, they're unlikely to catch most surface forces. Again, this is a scenario. The Royal Navy doesn't plan on chasing a Japanese task force down in the South China Sea with their submarines, hunting them from behind going, "We will catch you!" They also don't plan to do the same with a German task force which gets out past their submarines in the North Sea. Or an Italian one in the Mediterranean. No, their plan is to launch a salvo on them, hopefully damage them, maybe send them back to port, maybe delay them, maybe to cause them trouble, and then for the surface fleet and aircraft carriers to come in and do what they do best. It's a full force approach. In the case of South China Sea and heading towards Singapore, the idea is if you cause enough damage behind them, then what ends up hitting Singapore either doesn't come, because they go, "We've lost all our supplies," or is a hollow fist. It slams in and cracks on Singapore. That's the plan. It would have worked as well if it hadn't been for those... well, I would love to say meddling kids, but let's be honest, neither Mussolini or Adolf Hitler would pass for a child. There are other things they would certainly pass for, especially in modern chat rooms, but not a child. So, here are the vessels ordered, and I've included some details of them, where they've gone off for different navies, because I'm going to be concentrating mainly on the Royal Navy, but I thought it'd be appropriate to discuss a little bit about them. A little bit. Now, there are some interesting ships on this list, and I'm going to talk about the Thetis incident, because, of course, that features in my book. My Tribals, Battles, and Darings book. Yes, the Tribal-class destroyers are important in the Thetis incident. But I want to talk about P311. Now, she's an interesting vessel, because the Royal Navy have a name for her. But Winston Churchill really wants to give her another name, and the Royal Navy are finally going, yeah, we'll finally let him name something. They usually find a reason not to. Unfortunately, Fates decided to align with the Royal Navy on this occasion, although against the crew of the poor submarine. Because she was to be assigned the name Tutankhamun, after the Egyptian pharaoh. And he wanted this. He wanted this vessel to be named. It'll be the first Royal Navy vessel before or since to be named such. However, she's lost in the Mediterranean, some point between December 1942 and January 1943, before the name can actually be assigned, formally. So, she was commissioned and served under the number of P311. So that's what she's listed here. She had joined the 10th Submarine Flotilla in November 1942, and is lost with all hands. Now, she'd been commissioned in August 1942, and you would expect her to have been named on launching or commissioning, normally, but there is the fact that her original name which we're not quite sure what it was going to be. I think it probably would be one of the other T names already in there. Potentially a Trespasser or Tactician. Or Token. That seems to be another one which is considered. But the point is, Churchill has his way. And makes a big stomp until he gets what he wants. And he gets it. But it delays her naming so much that when she's lost, she doesn't have a name. Now, Thetis, well, she's one of the first. She is one of the first. She's built by Camel Lairds. Theoretically, gonna be a great boat. Has a small issue. Just a small issue. She gets sunk on testing due to the unintentional opening of the rear door of a torpedo tube while its bow cap was open. Now, interesting enough, this led to some very some technology development which probably saved a lot of Royal Navy submarines in World War II, and that was the Thetis clip, which prevented the rear torpedo tube door from being opened more than a fraction if the bow cap was not in place. Now, why are they reopening the torpedo tubes? Because, as I said, 6 of them, 6 out of the 10, are able to be reloaded, and they carry reloads for them. So they can fire a spread of 10, thanks to 2 non-reusable ones in the bow, and 2 back abreast the bridge, abreast the conning tower, that space. Later on, in subsequent designs, those 2 are the 2 which are turned to face aft, and give them some rear coverage. But, you know, for the first boats, they're all about the forward firing, all about the forward arc, all about the ambush. But that clip matters, because whilst in theory the bow caps are remotely worked and operated, and they had systems which were supposed to show if they were closed or not, if those didn't work and it was opened, the boat would go, and that's what happened to Thetis. She went straight down. She went straight down. Which is really not fun. And actually, it was Tribal class destroyers which turned up and which were critical to trying to run the program to try and save her. Now, the vessel itself was saved. It was saved. But most of the crew, 99 personnel, didn't. Now, the reason the other 99 didn't is because, honestly, 4 people managed to use the submarine's one-man escape chamber. But the 5th, and this again shows the importance of training, so people can do these things under extremely high pressure before you go into that scenario, panicked and jammed it. Which meant the remaining 99 couldn't get off. Including the man who jammed it. It's a sad story. It is a sad story. Now, again, as you can see from their actual numbers in service, if we consider how many are built versus how many are usually available in service for operations, you notice there's a big difference. Again, this is about force generation and about the utility of the force. It's also about the survival of the force and where they're being used. The amount of T-class boats which are lost to the Mediterranean. Again, you can argue, large boats aren't suitable for the Mediterranean. And you would be right. But peacetime exercises had not shown that as being as big a problem as it came to be. It was sort of believed, oh yeah, well if they're deep enough, da 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 da. You can hear all the reasons. And it's like most things which come as a result of peacetime exercises. There is a decent logic behind it based on the information received through the exercises. But sometimes, no matter how many simulations you do, no matter how many theoretical exercises you carry out, no matter how many exercises, actual exercises you carry out, the reality turns things which look like they are abnormalities, occasionals, randoms, low chance, into, oh frigate, that happens a lot. Now, with their service, I could try and do the whole class and all the boats, but these videos were supposed to be less than 20 minutes when I originally conceived the Keyship series, and I'm already at the 35-minute mark. And I didn't think I would be anything less than that, especially with the mood I'm in. So, I'm going to start by picking out 3. And I'm picking out Tribune, Trident, and Truant. Now, why have I picked all these 3? Because they pretty much served the whole of World War II. This led to a whole argument with a friend of mine who I was discussing this video with. Even while I had a cold, we were having this discussion. Which resulted in them actually calling me at one point, which was quite funny. Because then they went, no, I'll just text you because I can't understand you if you keep coughing and sneezing. I went, thank you. You called me. I was doing this by text. Because technically, they're commissioned in October 1939. So technically, they don't do the whole of World War II. But technically, if you consider the Japanese join in 1941, and the Germans exit the war before the Japanese do, neither do the Germans, or the Japanese, or the Italians do the whole of World War II. So if we're going to consider them full war combatants, despite the fact they don't do the entire period, why can't we consider the T-class, which only miss a frigating month, and not even a full month, wartime combatants? Full war combatants? I'm not sure. This is the thing that academic historians argue about, okay? We have no social lives. I admit this. But no. HMS Tribune, N76. Now, she's a good-looking boat. A really good-looking boat. As you can see, and the only one whose number is visible on her at this point in the picture. Her career began in the North Sea and the Scandinavian coast. She attacked all sorts of German vessels and merchant ships, including trying to get a kill on the U-56. She was aiming a torpedo at it. She was trying to do all sorts of things to try and take out that boat. But she didn't manage it. She really did try. I mean, one of the constant things of the Royal Navy throughout World War II is that there are 2 classes which seem to be obsessed with trying to kill other submarines. The T-class and the U-class. And it's the V-class, actually HMS Ventura, the evolution of the U-class, which actually achieve it by the end of World War II. When I'm talking about this, I'm talking about submarine-to-submarine underwater kill. And HMS Ventura is, I think, the only submarine to this day to actually have achieved that. I know, it's fun. Look her up. And once you look at the U and the V class design, you will see what I mean about the Royal Navy getting gradually more and more obsessed with streamlining an underwater performance of their submarines. I mean, it's pure poetry in form for the 1930s, 1940s. Anyway, Tribune tries her best. She really does. In the Mediterranean, well, she managed to damage a French merchant vessel. She also, and eventually sinks it. She also managed to take out a German tanker, the President Herrenschmidt. When I say take her out, she basically torpedo damaged her and was a structural write-off at various points. She also attacked the Benevento, but failed to hit her. And the interesting thing is, again, why are they failing to hit the targets? Well, because thing the Royal Navy forgot when they were training these vessels to be ambush predators and teach them about being ambush predators is that the level of target which justifies firing a full spread turn torpedoes is going to be few and far between. And usually what they do is they would fire 4 of the reloadable tubes. And they'd fire a spread of 4 torpedoes. That means they have 4 ready to go in terms of their their unreloadable tubes. If they spot a target coming in on them. And they've got 2 in terms of the reloadable tubes ready to go if anything happens while they're still reloading. So they could fire a spread of 4, and then another spread of 4, and then if necessary they can do a snapshot of 2 if they have to. Makes far more sense. Tribune actually gets to play HMS Tyrant in the film Close Quarters, which was put together in 1943, and it's well worth a watch. It's quite a cool movie. She sold for scrap in July 1947. And her number was reused for an unnamed submarine in Appointment with Venus in 1951, which was about a vessel taking British troops to the Channel Islands to rescue a pregnant pedigree cow from the German occupiers. Yes, I wasn't going to mention Appointment with Venus. I wasn't, but because I just thought it's just another film, it doesn't matter. But then I read the storyline of rescuing a pregnant pedigree cow from the German occupiers, and I couldn't resist. I just thought, that's the factoid. And I will put my hand up. I didn't find it in a book. I read a couple of books looking for this up. Didn't find it. Found it on Wikipedia. Then went and checked it up and went, it's true! So, whoever put it on Wikipedia, thank you. You haven't referenced where you found it. But I checked it up and it was true. And it's too good a fact not to use. So I will admit that I'm using a fact which I first found out on Wikipedia, because I hadn't heard about it before then. But which historian can resist that as a factoid? I mean, when eventually I get around to writing a book about the T-Class, that factoid is going to be well researched and is going to be in there. I mean, literally, I'm going to find all the source material about that movie, which gives me a backing up evidence to point out they didn't just randomly pick the number. Because it's a film about rescuing a pregnant pedigree cow with a submarine from the Channel Islands. You wouldn't get movies made like that today. Not 72 years later. That might be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on your opinion, but let's be honest, that's an original storyline. Now, Trident? Well, she has another fun career. She starts off in home waters, doing stuff in Norway. Basically, well, she goes around sinking German vessels in the North Sea from 1941 to 1943. She sinks rather a lot of them. She's very successful at it. The Germans are less so keen on her. And she makes several attempts to attack, again, German submarines. And German submarines try and sink her as well. I mean, she gets into a running exchange with U-566. She has fun with her. She also, at one point, fires 7 torpedoes at Prince Jürgen and Admiral Scheer, one of which hit Prince Jürgen, jamming her rudder, damaging her engines, but Admiral Scheer managed to escape unscathed. Again, it's that useful thing on that forward firing that salvo, that big spread of torpedoes. Might have been better to fire 10. But, in a scenario which could give light to the earlier discovered movie, and this is one of the reasons why I've picked these 3 ships, for quite a lot of her early career in 1941 to 43, she had a reindeer doe aboard, which was presented to them by the Russians in August 1941. It was named Pollyanna, and lived so well aboard the submarine that she even managed to eat some of the navigation maps. they had to actually, to get her out, they had an interesting debate. Because there were some people who wanted to use her for meat. The crew wouldn't allow that. But they did have to get some local slaughtermen to help truss her up securely so she'd be safe to get her out of the submarine so she could go to a zoo. For the rest of her life, she would bob her head 3 times whenever she heard a whistle. Oh, heard a whistle. Sorry. Again. Should not be recording when ill, but it's better to record than try and do a live, and I don't want to keep letting you go down by not doing videos. In the Mediterranean, she sank some sailing vessels. Had fun with that, you know. How often does a submarine get to revisit the age of sail and being a frigate? She tried to use her torpedoes to sink 2 submarines. Unfortunately, missed on both. But she kept trying. And then she's reassigned to from the Mediterranean to the Pacific and Far East. And she spends the rest of her career in the Far East, attacking the Japanese training cruiser, the Kashai, destroying landing craft with her 4-inch gun off the Batu Islands in June 1945. She does all sorts of little operations out in the Far East and has a very successful career out there. Doesn't pick up any more deer. And finally we have HMS Truant, which, despite the name, always seems to return home. Now, she was the submarine which managed to torpedo and damage the Karlsruhe off Kristiansand, Norway. That's, of course, the German light cruiser. She has a lot of fun in her career. Truant is one of those submarines where you sort of look at her and go, you were born under a lucky star somehow. Now, she accidentally attacks the British merchant vessel, the Alstair, unaware that it had been captured from the Germans, but thankfully her torpedoes missed. She intercepted the German merchant vessel, the Tropic Sea, which had been captured by the Orion surface radar. Now, Tropic Sea is scuttled by the German prize crew in the Bay of Biscay, but Truant embarks the captain and survivors of the Haxby that were aboard her, and the master of the Tropic Sea and his wife. The Norwegians are majoritively rescued by British flying boats, which were called in by Truant. Then, in a pursuit of the Royal Navy's ever love of trying to sink submarines with submarines, well, she's mistaken for a Type 9 by HMS Clyde, a River class. Luckily, Clyde's torpedoes missed. I'm not going to say the Royal Navy spent the entirety of World War II trying to kill a submarine with a submarine, but I honestly think it was an avowed intent. Definitely an avowed intent to use that particular phrase. She then goes to the Mediterranean in 1940, and she has some experiences sinking various Italian merchant vessels, submarine chasers and tankers and cargo ships, and damaging a few more. Again, she likes to try and attack submarines and fails. Just keeps trying. And then in 1942, she's sent to the Far East. She starts off with the Battle of Badung Strait, spotting the Japanese covering force, and she attacks Nagara, but sadly scores no hits. The crew reckon they heard impact noises, and they reckon their torpedoes were dud. And this is another problem for the Royal Navy, because the Royal Navy had working fuses, and their aerial torpedoes were good. But again, sometimes their torpedoes, in terms of their submarine ones, the 21-inch ones, were not as good. Especially when they were using older stock. Some of them hadn't been stored properly. This is a problem when you're an empire the size of Britain and you've got stores all around the world. That's where you have issues come in. She managed to sink some Japanese merchant vessels, came very close, very, very close, to sinking a liner. She held off when she realised it had hospital markings. It's possibly the Hikawa Maru. She also sank the Taman Maru, a Japanese army cargo ship, in a gun battle a few days later. At this point, she starts to experience engine trouble, and so she's sent back to the UK to be repaired. She has a refit from December 1942 to May 1943. She does undertake some training exercises and sorties to hunt for turpits, but she's ordered back to the Far East. Her engine troubles flare up again, and she returns home to get fixed again, and so doesn't Sortie. She's being used as a trial ship for 1945, including doing snorkel tests. She's sold to be broken up in December 1945, but is wrecked in December 1946 whilst en route to the shipbreakers. Again, another good career, but it's engine issues. And again, it's because, to an extent, they were pushing them harder than expected to be. Again, these vessels were designed as ambush predators, so they're supposed to get in a position and then lay quietly and wait for their opponent. Wait for their opponent to come to them. Patrolling was more what the S-Class were designed for, and to an extent the U-Class. Although in different ranges and different scopes. And as such, it does affect their hull life, and does affect their engine life. With that all being said, let's consider what could be one of the most successful of the class. HMS Turbulent. Sank potentially more than 100,000 tons, definitely more than 90,000 tons. It depends on how you add up the tonnage of the merchant vessel she sinks. This is her lovely citation. She was laid down in March 1940, launched May 1941, commissioned December 1941, sunk some point in March 1943. Potentially by the Italian torpedo boat Aldrito on the 6th of March, but we're not 100% sure because it could have been an action again on the 12th of March 1943 against the French submarine, the Casablanca, Redoutable class. There is all sorts of discussion. She was depth charged on roughly 250 occasions by enemy forces hunting her. That is a tremendous amount of fire to have received. And she sank 6 Greek sailing vessels, the Prodomos, the Agios Apostolos, the Agios Ionosov, the Evangelista, the Agionos Dionysus, and the Agia Treo. 9 Italian merchant vessels, the Rosa M. Delena, the Bolsena, the Capoama, the Regulus, the Mate, the Vittorio Berarda, Pozzoli, and San Vicento. Some Italian sailing vessels, the Franco, San Giusto, Gesù Giuseppe Maria, and the Pierre del Vergine. The Navigatoria class destroyer, Emmanuel Pesagano. There was the Strail, which was grounded near Cape Bon on the 1st of June 1942, and that was destroyed by Turbulent. The German ship, the Creta, the auxiliary submarine tender, the Benghazi of the German Navy, and the Italian tanker, the Utilitas. Also damaged the Pozzocaria and the Bixio. The Bixio was carrying roughly 3,000 Allied prisoners of war, of which 336 were actually killed. Either by the explosion or drowning, but they're killed by the attack. She also tried to attack a submarine off Fiume, the German U-81, which was identified, unidentified submarine off Fiume. The Ram 3, the Italian armed merchant cruiser that's always turning up in various points of World War II. the Anna Maria Gualdi and the Sesteri, which she tried to attack, and the transport the Ankara. And she also had some fun with the Principessa Mafalda. She was a very good ship. She was a very capable ship. Her and her crew did a lot of service in, well, let's be honest. It's not much more than 15 months. It's a couple of days. A lot of service they packed into 15 months. From commissioning to sinking. Now, she, of course, was one of the later designs, which had 6 internal torpedoes facing forward, 2 external forward-facing tubes, and non-reloadable, and 3 external sternward-facing torpedo tubes. As you can see, that's one of the stern tubes. You can see the other 2 back there. She's the outer vessel on this picture. And that meant, of course, she's carrying even more torpedoes. Because she's carrying 17. She also had a 4-inch deck gun and various AA guns. Please note we're saying various AA guns. It's always easier to go with various because the crews seem to take as much of an approach to them as, how do I put this politely, Royal Navy motor torpedo boat crews. To the idea of, ooh, that looks cute, I wonder if it would fit. And, well, that's HMS Fawn. And I picked her because that's one of the coolest pictures out there. She's, again, sunk in August 1942. She's commissioned in August 1941. She's actually commissioned on 26th August 1941 and lost on the 6th August 1942. She's not even a year in service. And she's lost. She was a useful vessel. The Royal Navy has a problem in World War II. They have a problem for their submarines. They have a problem for everything. In that, whereas their opponents mostly have massive targets to go after, convoys, huge roads of merchant vessels for them to go and sail down and attack, there isn't really that scenario. The commerce runners, well, let's call this the blockade runners. Sorry, blockade runners. I'm not recording a second video this evening. The blockade runners, well, they're good, but they're single ships. Running back from Japan to Germany, and so forth. Taking things like rubber and other critical supplies. The convoys running north-south across the Mediterranean from the Axis forces, they're important. But honestly, that's the Mediterranean, and that's a nightmare for operating large submarines in. The Royal Navy submarines, in many ways, spend most of their war waiting for the enemy to come out, to come to them. When they do, they engage them well. They take their flesh. And, yeah, that sounds a bit cold to probably to say, but let me make this point. For every Royal Navy submarine that's lost in World War II, and there are many of them which are lost, they exact a price on the enemy. And that price is far greater. Far greater than is lost with them. The thing is, you don't have the actions. The Royal Navy doesn't have the glorious, we sank this, to illustrate the submarine's capabilities, which is one of the reasons why I think the Belgrano in 1982 has gone down quite so much in history for the Royal Navy. Because it's the first time they're able to really show, yeah, we've done this, but everyone's seen we've done it. Everyone's seen that we have this capability, that we are good at our jobs. T-class were good at their jobs. They were ambush predators, and when given a chance to ambush... oh, Lord. Sorry, there was a cough there, but that was more a cough content. Trying to pronounce words with a blocked nose is no fun. I will say that. This is why this is the only video I'm doing today. They are excellent as ambush predators. But it's very hard to be an ambush predator when you don't have an enemy around to ambush. When they're not coming out. When they do, as the Carl Shrew and others show, oh my lord, do they work well. But it's when they come out. So, next year is going to be the year of aircraft carriers and possibly flagships, but probably aircraft carriers. And it's going to be kind of like the year of the cruiser. In that I'm going to structure through everything in terms of the ship classes and the individual ships. So it's going to be like it, but every Tuesday there's going to be a different carrier class or individual carrier being looked into from all the nations that produce them around the world. So every one I'm going to do, including the modern ones. I'm going to go right up to the modern ones. But as I always say with the modern vessels, I'll be using the stats and figures as presented on Wikipedia. The reason I do this is because I do work with a lot of people who work in the armed forces and various nations. And I have no wish to get any of them into trouble by someone being able to say they've leaked something to me or given me information, and therefore they have violated some agreement, or I've violated some agreement, because I'm using information which is not in the public realm. My view is, if it's on Wikipedia, it's in the public realm. So if those are the stats as related on Wikipedia, in terms of their operation stats, of their weapons, of their aircraft, that is what I'll be repeating. You might know better. I might know better. But I am not breaking security, and I'm not bringing trouble on my friends' heads by revealing anything. And by saying anything different than what is publicly available. And today's question. Well, today's question is a fun one. And this video is a lot longer than 20 minutes. It's going to be over an hour, isn't it? So, I really do like the Royal Navy submarines. I don't think they get a lot of attention. But I do like them. The question I'm going to ask is this. Have you heard of any operations conducted by Royal Navy submarines in World War II? And what were they? And in what light have you heard of them? Because I'd really interested to know. It's a bit of a survey for me to do, because at some point I'm going to do the year of the submarine. At some point I'm going to do the year of the submarine. That'll be an interesting year. A lot more classes to cover than aircraft carriers. And I want to know what sort of baseline I'm going to be starting from with my viewers, because I do realise you're all probably interested in topics, so you're probably fairly well read, but I also know how limited the resources are available about Royal Navy submarines in World War II. So I'd be really interested to hear what your knowledge is. Thank you very much for watching, and hope you enjoyed. Take care.